All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Andy Horowitz. I teach American history and environmental studies here at Tulane. It's my privilege to introduce you to this conversation. I get to name these things. I don't have to have them, so I can tell you the conversation about art, music, film, climate change, Louisiana, loss, and beauty, featuring Benh Zeitlin and Michot with Nick Spitzer. This is the second event in a series sponsored by the Environmental Studies program that's called the Katrina Disaster Now. And I want to tell you briefly about 3 upcoming events in that series, all of which are free and open to the public, and all of which, I'm happy to say, rely on a very generous donation and the essential logistical support of Shelley Moe and Katie Keene and Kathy Jack and other people here. So on Monday, October 26th, Professor Kai Erikson will be here. It would be ridiculous for me to say something like, he's America's greatest sociologist, but he is the only person to win the prize for best book in sociology twice. So you can do the math on that. He's a preeminent scholar of disaster, and he will be here at 5:30 Monday, October 26th, talking about sociology, history, disaster, trauma, and community. And then on Tuesday, November 10th, we're going to convene a discussion with leaders from across the Louisiana coast. And these include Minh Nguyen, the founder of the Vietnamese American Young Leaders of New Orleans, and Reverend Tyrone Edwards, the pastor of Zion Travelers Baptist Church in Phoenix, Louisiana, and Rosina Philippe from the Attakapas Ishak Nation in Grand Bayou, Louisiana, and Teresa Dardar from the Pointe-au-Chien Indian tribe in Terrebonne. And through a partnership with WWNO, they will be joined by NPR national correspondent Debbie Elliott for a conversation about rising seas, sinking land, climate change, Louisiana, justice, and community. And that's in Freeman Auditorium. And then one last culminating event, November 17th, 5:30, also in Freeman. We're inviting 15 Louisianans to reflect on the phrase, the Katrina disaster now. I'm not quite ready to tell you who those 15 people are, but I assure you, you will want to be there for an incredibly compelling conversation. So, I mentioned briefly this woman, Rosina Philippe, who will be with us on November 10th. I've been thinking about her today because I went to see her last week, and you should know that to get to her house, you have to drive around 50 miles downriver from New Orleans, and then you turn west and go over the levee onto a gravel road. You drive around a mile down the gravel road till you reach a parking lot where you can leave your car and get into a boat in a canal, and you go around a mile down the canal till you reach Grand Bayou, and then you turn and you go a little bit of a ways up Grand Bayou till you get to the place where Rosina Philippe's family has lived for around 700 years. And when I was there last week, Rosina said to me, as we sat on her porch, she said, a lot of people think Native Americans have disappeared. They think we're of the past. But I say, look at how we're living here. As we looked around, we saw houses built on pilings. We saw boats docked out in front. That's not her, just to be clear. I'm not that good. Boats docked out front, floating on seas that are rising amidst land that's eroding quickly. She said, this is not our unique past. This is all of our collective future. So I hope you'll come on November 10th to let her explain what that meant to her. But as I was thinking about tonight's event, her words called to mind for me these mythical beasts, the aurochs and beasts of the southern wild, and the mammoth on the cover of Louis' Mammoth Waltz. That got me thinking about these irrepressible, fossil-fueled forces from the past that come stampeding into our present and haunt our future. So I don't know, my interpretation there might be completely wrong. The good news for you and bad news for me is that they can immediately correct me because the artists are here themselves. I will introduce them briefly. Michot is a singer, songwriter, and fiddler who lives in a house he built himself from the salvage of older houses. How's that for an irrepressible past? He lives around 2.5 hours west of here, outside of Arnoldville. And with his Grammy-nominated band, the Lost Bayou Ramblers, Louis released 6 albums. Is that right? 7, he tells me. And performed all over the world, most recently in Brazil, correct? Performing music in French that's at once ancient and avant-garde. And working with his collaborative Court 13, Benh Zeitlin wrote, directed, and scored Beasts of the Southern Wild, a film that received so many prizes and so much love that even though it's all deserved, it would actually eat up the rest of our time for me to even start trying to name them all. But I trust you've seen the film and that you all will be going to see it again on Saturday night at the Sanger, when it will be screened with the score performed live by Louis and the Wordless Music Orchestra, a number of very talented people. And they are in the capable hands of Nick Spitzer, Tulane's own professor of anthropology, host and producer of National Public Radio show, American Roots. And like the two artists that he is playing referee between today, it seems like, from the way he's sitting.
I didn't bring my striped jacket.
Yeah. Nick has made a career sharing and interpreting the significance of our local cultures in Louisiana for national and international audiences. So we're in good hands, and let's make them welcome.
Just a couple thoughts here. First of all, everybody here has ancestors that go back 700 years. Most of them haven't stayed in the same place. And that's particularly interesting given the history of the homeless. And I actually spent a little time out there just before a hurricane that some of you won't remember, but it had the name Bob, Hurricane Bob. It doesn't sound as groovy as Gustave or Katrina, and it was a lot less destructive than both of those. But I was actually out at Grand Bayou just before that. I hadn't read the weather reports, and I was doing field work. That's back when I worked for the state. And then the word came out that everyone should evacuate, and there were quite a few of the elders that just said no. And there was a little trail of pirogues and bass boats and bateaux heading back to that spot, your launch spot. But they were there with salt around doorways and candles and prayers and things that mixed the world of probably medieval France Catholicism with homo belief. So I have a memory of that. And it also takes me back to fieldwork in Terrebonne Parish from way back when. And I went out to Ile-Jean-Charles and Pointe-à-Chien and some of those places and was always amazed by the way some places just couldn't even in the late 70s be reached at high tide and people living on stilt on piers and such. And I reflect on Katrina. A lot of people said New Orleans was a rickety mess with bad infrastructure, and that was our problem. But I've always believed that the biggest problem with Katrina was not the antiquity of the city, but our horrific modernity. And so the Native Americans are great examples of all kinds of things. And I want to touch on some of those things this evening. I guess I have the right now to play PhDJ, which is an interesting role to fill at Tulane. You find about a third of the people think that's wonderful, about a third of the people think it's terrible, and the rest have no opinion. But in that light, I looked at the beginning and portions again of Beasts of the Southern Wild, which I enjoyed so much, and I noticed that the first song was Volsa Balfa, yeah? Yep. From the Balfa Brothers.
Yep.
And Louis, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind playing that for us so that when we see the clip, we can all recognize it. The Balfour Brothers are a legendary family from near Mamou, Louisiana, as in the Mammoth Prairie, I guess.
Exactly.
And this is an amazing old waltz, and I love I didn't notice it when I watched the film the first time. Oh, the second time I watched it, I noticed. So, comment tu veux, monsieur?
All right.
Parti pour chercher ou mourir pour mon sang. J'arrive à ta maison, j'en ai trouvé une autre victoire, ça casse mon cœur. Jamais mourir que croissant. Si j'avais 5 jours dans ma vie, já me morrer dans tes bras.
Yeah, right. Louis, since I think music and words are a visual medium, if you know what they mean, could you tell us a few of the scenes? That's a pretty tough little song, actually.
Yeah, it's a song written by Will Bolfa, one of the Bolfa brothers from Mamu, and I could talk. I'm kind of realizing some things about the song as I was playing it and how it fits in with the movie and just with older times and such. But it basically says, when I left the house, I left to see you, and I wouldn't stop until the end of my blood or something like that, or until yeah. And then when I got to your house, I found someone else with you, and that broke my heart. I'd rather die than see that. And then the last verse is, if I had 3 days, if I had 5 days of my life, I'd give 3 to pass the other 2 with you.
Yeah, I like those Cajun heartbreak songs. They're very deep. They cut deep. So Ben, how did you end up getting together to work on this film?
Well, it was around that song actually, because in early sort of when I was writing the film and when we were researching it and kind of like designing the score before we actually made the film, the original idea was to really score the whole film with Cajun music, and that song was going to be the main theme of the movie. And I've heard it long ago. My dad's a folklorist, and I'd heard it in his collection. But when I came to New Orleans, I heard Louis play it, and then so it was always in my head. And it was always sort of a dream that if we made a film, that we'd be able to get the Lost Bayou Ramblers to play in it. And then when it was done, they agreed to do it. And so it all surrounded that song, really.
Since we've heard a little bit of Louis' art, maybe you could set up a little bit of your art. We've got a clip here from Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Yeah, so we're going to watch the kind of intro to the main town in the film, which is called the Bathtub. How many people have seen it? Almost everyone's seen it. Okay, great. Makes it so much easier. I guess rather than explain the bathtub, I'll talk a little bit about sort of the different elements of the music. This is like a very important. This was the piece of music that we knew was going to establish the musical language of the film, and the way the trajectory of the music moved was that when we started off trying to score the whole film with Cajun music, and it didn't really work. And what we kind of realized is that the music needed to do, the whole movie is very much from this little girl's point of view, and that the music really needed to be an expression of her mind more than a kind of like, sort of like factual representation of what music was like in the region or something. And so what we kind of realized was that I thought back to sort of when I was 5-6 years old and the music that I really loved at that time. And it was really all about like the Indiana Jones theme and the Batman theme. And those were the songs that like when I was like eating my Cheerios, I'd be like, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, and I remembered the way that like you score your life at that time with these super simple, iconic cinematic songs. And so we realized that her interpretive vision, like the way that she interprets her life as something that's grander than what's actually happening, needed to be expressed by a score that was more cinematic, but we wanted to still ground the film in this traditional music. And so if you pay attention to the music, this scene moves back and forth between her vision and interpretation of what's happening and actually just showing you what's happening in the town. And so what we wanted to do in the piece of music was alternate between this big cinematic film score, actual music being played in the town, but then show the way in which her consciousness is actually those two things woven together. And so there's a part of the music that was really important for us to establish how the whole language was going to work, where you hear the band playing the Balfa Waltz, which is not Louis on screen, but is Louis actually singing. And then as she starts to interpret again, you hear the film orchestra come in and reharmonize the actual chords of the Balfa Waltz, and then sort of sweep it back up into her imagination music. And so those are the two textures that we wanted to play with at all times throughout the score. And I wanted to show this because this is where we sort of set up that language, and we thought it would say a lot about the town, and also the way that we were treating the subject matter, which was complicated to articulate because it's very much not a film. It's a film very much grounded in South Louisiana, but it's very much not factual, and that it's this sort of heightened, both by her interpretation and by our interpretation, not our interpretation, but our treatment of it. It's bigger, and it has disparate elements that don't actually coexist in any one place. And so we wanted to establish this language of kind of magical, heightened reality, layered with a real feeling for what the actual place is. And so trying to strike that balance was all kind of set up in this sequence that we're going to watch, and hopefully we pulled it off.
Okay. Shall we roll the clip? Do we need to get out of the way, or is this going to just...
I don't know. Hopefully it'll clear our heads. We're not so tall.
While I struggle with the horrific modernity of the DVD player, can I invite everybody to come in and then close the door so the fire marshal can't see what we've done? Come on in. Sit here, sit on the floor.
There's
come on
seats
in.
in there,
Yeah.
y'all.
There's a few seats.
Don't take my seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, there won't be a collection. You don't have to worry about
Yes.
sitting down front.
This side, that side. The box.
Okay.
Should we make shadow puppets?
Yeah, really.
Let's fight. Shadow boxing.
They built a wall that cuts us off. They think we all gonna drive down here. But we ain't going nowhere. The bathtub's got more laundry than the whole rest of the world.
Rolling Jeremy.
Daddy always say that up in the dry world, they got none of what we got. They only got holidays once a year.
All right. You know, I have to say, watching through the film again, you teased at the beginning the fact that there was sort of a global warming question, it seems to me, because you had all that melting ice. And that's when we first see the mythological beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was focusing, the crawfish looks like a little aurochs, but they're living, but
They're dinosaurs too.
yeah, right. But the other one is frozen in a area that we think is going to be a melting eventually. Mm-hmm. So you kind of really teased the environmental concern for global warming right at the top, it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to sort of, again, kind of look at that through the misinterpretive eye of a small child, you know, and less sort of dig into like the science of it and more sort of dig into the the emotions of it. You know, that was always sort of the meeting point where the film is really two parallel stories and was built that way. It's a story about a little girl losing her father and about a town losing its land. And the way that those two losses are so the connection between those two losses is really how the film kind of found its footing. And so, we wanted to kind of get at the feeling, you know, when I went down to Pointe-aux-Chenes and Ile-de-Jean-Charles and all those areas, and sort of the feeling when you talk to people and what it was like to have lived in a forest and to be growing old in a barren wasteland and to have seen your land shrink around you, and sort of this idea that where you grew up and where you're from is no longer going to exist in the future. You know, trying to sort of dig out the emotion of that and sort of interpret it through a 5-year-old girl's mind is sort of where the idea of connecting all the kind of, there's so many reasons for what's happening down there, but to sort of pull out, like, what would a child really dig into, like, a giant melting ice cube, like, right. And, this idea of, the ancient past coming unfrozen and coming to take over what's yours, and trying to dig out sort of like what visual things would kind of you'd latch onto when you were that young. So we don't want to get into like, global warming and the science of it. We wanted to get into this sort of very simple childlike idea of just that ice caps melt, the water rises, and the bathtub's gone. And that's the degree to which she understands it.
Well, the whole film to me is amazing about environment and community, and it operates at a very cosmic level, but it's also very concrete because we get to see these things. But I have to give away one, well, it's not really a secret between Ben and I, but we first met when he was 12, and I know his father very well and his mother, folklorists in New York City. So it's to me a brilliant thing to take a child's eye view, because it allows the viewer themselves to be rethinking something that might have had a certain image of. But so what was New York? Was there anything in your New York experience before you got here that made you think like this about the fragility of family, community? I mean, Sandy has since happened since Katrina.
Nothing to do with it. I don't know. I actually don't think so. I think that it was something that really struck me. It was something that really struck me coming here when I did. I visited you when I was 12, decided I was going to move here. I was back in 2004 trying to move here, and then I came right after the storm. And a lot of what sort of got me was like, especially when I was moving here, people up north would ask me, like, why would you do that? Why would you live there? Like, it's going to be gone. Why would, and that question was so much more powerful for people that actually had their roots in these places. And to me, it was such an idiotic thing to ask someone, especially once you're here and sort of see how much, how vibrant the place is and how impossible it would be to actually move it. They're like, you should just move it to somewhere else. And it's like, no, it's so rooted in the...
Right, and we did have earth scientists after Katrina suggesting the whole city be moved to Morganza.
Right, yeah.
So,
so a lot of that rhetoric that I sort of heard when I moved, and this movie got started a little bit later. It was right after Gustav in like 2008, 9, and going down to the bayou and talking to a lot of people and sort of, hearing that sort of holdout point of view, and then trying to humanize it and try to connect it in a way that anybody can understand it from anywhere. And the way that we sort of found to do that was, it's like, well, yes, this place is sick, this place is dying, but would you abandon your parent if they were sick and dying? No. So it's like, that was a way to translate the feeling that I was hearing from people that I was talking to down the bayou, and I felt like you could take that anywhere in the world and make people understand why people stay against safety and logic and science and things like that.
Well, I think before Katrina, there were a lot of people in the Northeast and the West Coast who would ask you if you moved to Louisiana why you were doing it,
Right.
And they would question your sanity and your concept of a career and all these other things. My family made comments to me over the years about that. And on the other side of the ledger, after Katrina, sorry, Lou. I think many more people realize the power of culture and community here in the recovery, and so some of that came back in a different way. But why did you come here? Did you come here to make this film, or did you come here for another reason?
Well, I actually found out from my high school girlfriend recently that I had pledged to move to New Orleans right after I came back from visiting you. I said I was going to move to New Orleans and I was going to wear a cape, and that was going to be my life. And I won't wear a cape, thank God.
And
but,
you had to have her remind you of that?
Yeah, I was trying to remember when I decided, but I always sort of wanted to live here. But then I came in 2006 and made a film called Glory at Sea,
Right.
a short film, and that was sort of my way in. But yeah, I came here in 2004 and was like, oh, this is gonna be the spot eventually, and then found my way back with the movie.
But why? I'm asking the New Yorkers question now.
Right. I
Are
don't
there
know.
any New Yorkers in the room? Of course there are. It's Tulane. Yeah, okay. We love New York. I grew up near there myself, but
I think I sort of felt like the attitude of the even when the first time I came, I remember just like walking around having a guitar player like walk into the street and play me a guitar solo because I was too young to get into the bar, and everybody else in the club was like missing out. And I just remember I had certain memories that were like the way people approach making art and being creative here is so warm and so inviting, and it's at once weird but also incredibly, it's for people, it's for pleasure, and it's for people to enjoy it. And I remember feeling like that's the way that I want to make things and wanting to do that here, as opposed to New York where it's all about status, money, power, why people, it's like you try to.
we have some of that here too.
I mean, a little bit, but there's a more like.
It's more codified there.
There's a more always for pleasure mentality,
Yeah.
Well,
Carnival can turn everything upside down at least once a year, and as far as the status hierarchy goes, What was your impression of Ben when you guys started to work together and all this? What was your thinking when he started talking about something involving you and Cajun music? And
I remember the first conversation we had on the phone, trying to explain what Beasts of Southern Wild was about, and definitely have always for a long time been, been a kind of an environmentally aware person, and
your dad, your uncle, songs about it.
Yeah, definitely. My dad was he's a wetlands biologist, kind of right in the heart of the whole problem. I remember he was trying to explain to me, and I was like, man, that sounds really awesome. And he was like, yeah, it's. I remember you trying to tell me, it's such a hard thing to explain, like trying to explain this movie to anybody, even after you've seen it, much less before you made it. Yeah. And then when it came time, we were at that time. It was a very, very busy time in my life too. I had just had my second child, and there was a lot going on, so wasn't as involved as I would have liked to have been during the time, but they made a big effort to come to Lafayette to record us, and so that was kind of a thing where I think we had met at shows and stuff, and just kind of like that, and then then we finally met in Lafayette, and then the thing started rolling. So it was a pretty laid back, organic process how it actually came to be, but the first time, and then from my point of view, we had the easy job, I like to say. We just played the song I played for you just now, and a few others, and then they spent the next year in a basement, making the actual score.
Yeah.
You know, so and you know the whole thing from my perspective is I had the easy part.
Right.
But then when it came time to see the film, when the film finally came out, and I'm sure other people have had this same experience, I couldn't even watch it because my wife started getting extremely nauseous and crying, and me too. It was just so overwhelmingly, it just touched you so deep that we literally had to walk out within 20 to 30 minutes. It didn't help that we had just had a giant meal at Cochon before. but that's I mean, you know, you can do a lot of things after having a big meal, but
Maybe the film should have an announcement saying "Don't eat before the film." Well, you know,
but I just wanted to say that someone who's coming Saturday from Lafayette, it's their second time to see it because they had the exact same experience.
So
and
intense for
being from Louisiana and it's like wow, someone really gets, you know, the struggle and the beauty, and it's like somehow it hit you so hard that you couldn't even. I mean, I've never had that happen with a movie that you can't continue watching. So they're coming to actually watch the film for the first time Saturday.
well, you know, about media, I mean, and having to wait and he goes into a dark room, I mean, doing media is delayed gratification. You know, you go, oh, that'll be great. And then you go, oh, wait, that didn't really work too well.
Yeah.
Whereas when you play a song, it's the dancing or the people are listening and it kind of goes. But it seems to me both of you guys have something in common that, and maybe you've talked about it, but I mean, your family has been very concerned about the environment. You're very concerned about the continuity of Cajun culture, music, the language, and your family's been very concerned about communities and culture too. And I just, you know, but you guys have taken it to other levels, cosmic and concrete levels. Could you say a little more about just some of those songs and why your father and uncle and others? I mean, isn't there one song about losing the old swimming hole?
Oh yeah,
this is the Michot brothers.
Yeah,
that's the dad and uncle band.
Yeah,
and then of course Lost Bayou Ramblers.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There's actually a few cool connections because the Balfour Waltz is from Mamou, where the Michots were where my grandpa and them were raised, and they knew the Balfours, and then my dad they started playing like in the '80s. And my dad has been a wetlands biologist for, you know, most of my life, and we grew up with him trapping snakes and all kind of stuff for research, and spent a lot of time out, you know, pretty deep in some pretty wild places, doing research and all. But yeah, you know, one of the songs the song you're referring to is I believe. The Bayou Vermilion One Step, where he basically says, you know, when I was little, we used to be able to swim in the Vermilion, and then we ask as little children, why can't we go swimming there? He's like, well, it's contaminated, it's polluted, and at the time it really was pretty bad. In the '80s, it was probably one of its worst levels ever, and you know, it's definitely been something that my dad has tried to bridge, has been the music and environmental awareness, which has taken so long, you know, in Louisiana to come around. Just being aware of the situation with land loss and pollution. I mean, Louisiana it's just, you know, it's one of the most tragic places in America as far as, you know, the center of oil production, and everybody has just been so used to being able to do whatever they want. And it keeps the money coming, so who cares? You know, it's a very tricky balance that we've had to navigate. And then he's the one who's, you know, been taking the samples and core samples and going out to the Chandler Islands. He used to go out there all the time, and you know, now they're barely even there. And so he's been right at the forefront of the scientific part of you know, collecting all that data to see actually how fast things are deteriorating and changing.
One of the things I find amazing about your father and the Michot brothers is that, and I think your dad brought this up to me, in Lafayette, I think over the years there's been this tendency to think that if somebody has a college degree, or a professional degree, that they're somehow not part of the culture. They refer to people as educations, and sometimes that split.
Never heard that.
I think he said that actually to me once. and in fact, it's just not true, especially among the cultural citizens like your father, who also cares about culture. I mean, plays the music, speaks the language, teaches his kids. I mean, I know you guys rock and roll too, and they did as well. But it's an interesting family history you've got there. It kind of sets you up for a lot of these big questions of the environment as well as loss of community.
Yeah, it actually brings me to an interesting story about his father, Louis Michot II, who was raised in Mamou, like I said. He went to school there a little bit. He was the first generation to not be allowed to speak French because his dad and mom were teachers in Point Bleu and Mamou and all around there. So they were the ones who were enforcing the laws that you couldn't speak anything but English. And Papa Lou ended up making it all the way to college and dropped out of college to start a business, a drive-in theater in Lafayette. But he ended up going on to be, yeah.
Check that out.
But he ended up going on to be the superintendent of education for the whole state of Louisiana. And when his opponent called out that he only did one semester of college and he was running for superintendent, he said, "Well, all of you out there who have a college degree, vote for him. If you don't have a college degree, vote for me." And he won. And in doing that, he didn't have a college education. He was the superintendent of the whole state of Louisiana, and he's the one who passed in Codafil to bring in the French and everything.
Well, one of the great things about Louisiana I've always found is it has some of the most orally literate citizens I've ever met, meaning they've kept to culture and it's intimate and it's deep and it still is, and we hope it'll continue. So maybe you could say a little bit about your awakening to culture. Since we did talk about his parents and a little bit about that, because we discussed once this question of how your films have big themes and I love the Glory at Sea. It's so cosmic and it really prefigures, I think, a lot of what you were able to make work here at a much even grander level. But your parents were running around New York City documenting how people used to swim in the river and the old games of the fire hydrants and all the ethnicities and the subway workers and
Totally, yeah. Yeah, no, my parents are folklorists, and so that was both of them. And so my whole reality growing up was sort of going to these little crannies of culture in New York City. They were documenting like this sort of last legs of the medicine shows, like the last people alive who had still done the medicine shows, and through the last medicine show that ever existed. And we're always trying to. My dad does stuff like talking about language. He's doing a project right now to write a poem that's a collaboration between people all over the world who speak endangered languages. It's going to be a poem that has all the languages that are about to disappear from the face of the earth by the last people that still write poetry in those languages. So, I think that's certainly, I don't know. Like I always, when you grow up, you're trying to rebel and you're trying to be like, I was like, I'm never going to be a folklorist. And the first review of my movie was like the folkloric something. It was like, I didn't even know this was happening, but it's certainly just how, I don't know, that was my whole childhood, was being raised around sort of like the last stand people celebrating bizarre, like, idiosyncratic cultures that were about to disappear.
You're carrying
so
the ritual saints in Brooklyn and all kinds of things. Yeah. Well, I remember when your dad and mom were here a few years ago for a conference and they spoke on campus, he introduced himself and your mom as the producers of the director. And I thought that was wonderful, a wonderful way to handle that. But you did say something to me that stuck with me, because I think anybody that works in cultural conservation and folklore, to me it's about the future as much as the past. And that doesn't square with all my friends in my field exactly, in anthro or folklore. But it seems to me that you said to me at the time that it's an awfully small world, the world of folklore. And it is. There's very few folklore departments in the country left. There's some few here and there. But my response was, yeah, but it's about everybody everywhere, and the concerns about continuity and creativity of culture and its value in the world. And it seems to me that the film is very much about some of those big issues, though it's not adjudicated by the folklore, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, you know, we absolutely wanted to, even though we were making this film that was sort of a myth and sort of a fable, to have that be grounded in the culture of South Louisiana and celebrate it and take it around the world. I mean, we didn't know this was going to be played around the world, but once it was being played around the world, it was great to talk about it, because you take this, I mean, you even take this to, like, you know, parts of New England, and they don't know that this film is shot in America. People think it's like, oh, is this like filmed somewhere in Africa and you just had them speak English, or, you know, like, people don't know this part of the world exists at all, especially overseas, but even inside the country. It's amazing. So it was cool to go around and talk about where the film is from with people that don't know that South Louisiana exists and aren't aware of the issues and, you know, all that.
Could you guys talk a little bit about how you then actually get, I mean, you mentioned that you did the sessions, and how is this going to work, I mean, in the film, okay, and then it's coming up at the Sanger on Saturday night. You're going to be doing the live performance of the music with Lost Bayou Ramblers and an orchestra that follows. Tell us about first how you put it together and the, you know, as you did it, and then what's happening on Saturday night. That's like a performance event.
Yeah, well, it's a credit to these two fellows right here, Runner and Richie. From Wordless Music.
Wordless Music.
And they basically approached us with the idea, and this was actually, the first short I made was a film that was designed to be played with a live piano. It was like a playing off of silent film theme. So I wanted to be a musician, and I was definitely not good enough. And one of the only things that's always frustrated me about being a filmmaker is you're completely disposable once you finish making the movie. Like, you just don't matter at all. You are the guy who presses play on the DVD player, you know? And so when they approached us with the idea of doing a live score, which is a hugely complicated production, you know, so the film has to be remixed and all the score is stripped out, and then you know, a big orchestra, how many pieces? It's like 24-piece orchestra. Comes in.
You guys are wordless tonight, huh?
Yeah.
Just nod and go like that and smile.
But it's like an
like
orchestra on stage, and then there's the Cajun band at the front of it, and you know, we the Lost Bayou Ramblers. You know, we at first we just did it with Louis and other players, but now we have the whole band coming, and you know, we play the score live as the film is going, and it's a live concert movie event, which is. It totally changes how you experience it. I've seen it happen now 3-4 times, and it's a really powerful effect. It just, you don't, you know, when you watch a movie, you're, you know, it's, I don't know, it's like, it's becoming more and more like, oh, you watch YouTube, you watch your computer, you watch this, you watch that. Going to the movie theater is like an extension of it, but this is a real actual performance where there's real people, you know, making the art as it's happening, and there's an interaction that happens between the audience and the film that never gets to happen in movies. So it's an amazing concept, and executing it is crazy, and these guys figured out how to do it and approached us, and yeah.
Well, it's all sounds very modern and complicated, but of course, films were silent to begin with, and there were players in the hall, and sometimes they really made the film. A bad film could have a good player. I suppose vice versa, but this really, it really does sound incredible.
Yeah, we're gonna have, you know, the first few times we did, like we mentioned, it was myself, Ben, and Dan Romer, who did the score with Ben, playing, and a few other people. And then the last time we did it, we brought actually the whole Lost Bayou Ramblers band up. So this time it's going to be all of us together with the orchestra and everything. So it's this is all the other times in New York and London, LA were just rehearsals for New Orleans.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I know you're not into status, so you're not going to call it the Lost Bayou Ramblers Orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's new. That's new, guys. Well, actually, let me go back to something about the Lost Bayou Ramblers. I mean, you're you know, for many years, people would have a band from a named place. You know, the Mamu Playboys. They did stick on Playboys because probably Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, or they all thought they were Playboys, or some combination of the two. And Lawtell Playboys locations. And then in the 30s, there were more and more of these bands with name Ramblers, which was like country fiddle bands at that time, kind of, and a lot of Cajuns started naming themselves Ramblers. But I never heard of a Lost Bayou Rambler, and I wondered, is the Lost Bayou a disappearing place or a place where you're lost and looking? I don't know. How did you get the name is the question. I'll just go to the question.
Well,
How did you get the name?
It was kind of the egg, I guess, that came first. Someone named us, a friend of mine, on the way to our very first performance, which was 16 years ago, almost to the day. And we were on the way. My brother and I had just started playing accordion fiddle because we played guitar and bass in the family band. So we had just picked up the lead instruments, and we were on the way to our very first gig or whatever, because a friend of mine asked us to come play at this cafe he was booking shows at. So, all right, sure, we'll come play. He said, yeah, you and your brother, play that Cajun music, whatever. And we called my uncle, and a couple other people came. It was not a big deal at all. We didn't have a name, or weren't even a band. And on the way, I stopped to have some drinks with some friends, and my buddy was like, hey, what's y'all's name? I said, we don't have a name. He said, how about the Lost Bayou Ramblers? I said, that sounds great. So we used it, and but ever since then we've been trying to figure out what it actually means, and I think you're right. I think it's more, you can say that we're lost, but it's the bayou that's lost, and it's kind of does fit in with the same theme as Beasts of Southern Wild and my dad's songs of Ostamesh Perdu and the whole thing about Louisiana
Waltz of the Lost
being
Marsh.
Lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's
well,
it
does fit
into our name.
It does fit the aesthetic of indie rock with Lost Highway records, and of course Hank Williams before that, the Lost Highway too. So you can make it work a bunch of ways. Beasts of the Southern Wild. I got in trouble with a listeners once when I had a script that was actually written by a Southerner, and we were doing the only show we've ever done on New England from American Roots. And I grew up in New England, and I let my Southern friend write a script that said, and that's the sound of a campfire in the wilds of Maine. And a bunch of people from Maine wrote me a letter complaining about it being called the wilds of Maine. And I'm thinking, there's sensitivity, but geez. But how did you get the name Beasts of the Southern Wild? And had anybody from the South ever said, listen, man, it's not beastly and wild here? I don't know, man. It's amazing what people will complain about.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was in the original text, which is because I co-wrote the film with my friend Lucy Alabar, who's from the Florida-Georgia line, which is now a band.
That was a bar on the coast. That's Floribama. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for your correction. I know you know all the bars on the coast.
So she had written it. I don't know. It was weird how it became the title. It was something that she had read in a book by somebody else, and then she had put it into a speech by the teacher. And then when I read her original play, which the film was adapted from, I pulled the name out. I was like, oh, that's a great name, and it can mean so many different things next to the movie. I mean, the film is about so many. On one level, it's about the Aurochs, who come from like the Antarctic South. On another hand, you can interpret it as, a movie that's about Southern America, and there were so many ways to play with the name, and it fit so many ways, and so I just lifted it from her text and put it on top of the film, and we actually thought we were gonna have to change it always through the entire thing because it belonged to somebody else, but then we ended up not having to end up saying the name. So yeah, that's the story.
What is it, do you think, that ultimately leads you to create something that is so strongly mythic in quality and literary in quality and as a vehicle for your concerns about these things, rather than documenting other people's immediate issues in one particular community or culture? Why operate at this grand level?
I mean, I think it's sort of, on one level, it's personal. Just that's where my imagination starts. I used to do animation, and that's where I came from. Was like making animated films, and the sort of, I love The Little Mermaid, that kind of thing. But I thought it was such an interesting challenge to try to do both things at the same time, and I guess the reason. The dream of it is that you can take something that's so intensely local, but then make it something that's intensely universal, because myth is something that you can take anywhere in the world, and people who know nothing about Louisiana can watch this film and just watch it as a fairy tale and still sort of understand thematically and emotionally these universal themes, because myth operates on such a grand, simple level that can translate. And I think that was sort of what always drew me to sort of finding the parallel, was like starting, because this film really started with a myth. We really started with the myth and then found the place. It was almost like, where do these myths still actually exist? You know, where is something this dramatic as this? The original story was about a little boy whose father's death was bringing the apocalypse, quite literally. You know, so it was literally the four horsemen were coming as the cancer was getting worse, and that was the story. And so it was like, where is this emotion actually happening? And just when you go down, when I drive down the bayou and see this natural environmental apocalypse, literally as you drive south, it's like another plague, and that sort of biblical level of catastrophe felt like we can tell a story that's intensely real, but is also intensely mythological and can mean so much to people who know it locally, but also be understood by people a million miles away.
And you know, I mean, you reference the Old Testament in a sense with the flood and all these things. You know, I reflect on the fact that if you study economics, no one says that you're a bad person if you choose microeconomics over macroeconomics. I mean, the two of them sometimes feud a little bit about things. But when you're trying to do macro culture versus micro culture, I have noticed over the years that when I was in anthropology as an undergraduate, you know, it was okay to think about the globe and the totality of culture and being human. And there were literary anthropologists that dealt with all that sort of thing. And then there were people that did real deep field work, both in the world of biological anthropology, linguistics, and ethnography. And now I think in anthropology we've stepped away from the global concerns. And it bothers me actually a lot. So when I see a film like yours, it may be a medium that really works to connect both the very micro and the macro together in one place.
Yeah, we thought about that just in terms of the medium very much too, of sort of like, you see a lot of films and a lot of anthropological films or folkloric films, and they're great, but they could be an essay also. You know, they're informational and they're telling you the facts, you know. And for me, one of the great things about cinema is you have the ability to play a crazy Steven Spielberg score over a scene of culture, which you would never be able to do in a essay. You know, like that's sort of what's great about cinema, is you have light, you have visuals, you have sound, and the ability to use all of those elements to their highest degree, you know, it's what makes it impossible to be on paper, you know. And we wanted to make something that could only be a movie. And so,
well, back to True Confessions. The last time I saw Ben, this is before he made the film, and he was asking me about things written about the Native Americans, the Homas in Terrebonne Parish. So I went and got him an essay from the Louisiana State Folklife Guide that we had done under the rubric of ethnography of these communities. I will say there was nothing in that essay about the Homas. It's called Men Altogether Red. It was called by, it translated from something that someone had said, a village elder had said. And there was no mention of the problems of the environment, which were there then. Mm-hmm. But I was really intrigued by the kind of film he made after handing that to you. and then I said to him, I wondered, have you ever had people who come from that documentary direction who say, hey, this is not, wait a minute.
Yeah,
this isn't Terrebonne Parish as I know it. And native, they could be natives as well as academics who might say that to you.
Totally, yeah. And we've definitely had conversations with people that sort of question the facts of the film or something. But it's hard to, it's just not the language of the movie, and we made specific choices to not call the town Ile de Jean Charles, not call not actually name names and not actually try to put a pin on the map and say this is what this is about, but to try to call it something like the bathtub, call it something that would never be a town name, try to raise it above the level of arguing what's true factually and try to get to what's true emotionally. That was always our goal, and we felt like if you were too tied into the sort of like facts, you were going to not give yourself over to the emotional truth, and that was always the end goal of the film, was to take you there, you know.
Yeah, I think the name Bathtub's a brilliant name, actually, since it's like water in a homey, comforting place. And home is comforting, even though the whole place is surrounded by water.
I actually got it from a Houma Indian, though.
Did you really?
Yeah. He told me he was. He was originally from the island and living in Pointe aux Chenes. We were something like, oh yeah, we're going over to the island. Do you know anybody we should talk to? He was like, oh, you're going over to the bathtub.
Oh, so they mentioned that. Okay.
Yeah, you know that it's a nickname that they use, but we knew that it wouldn't. You know, I don't know how many people know that.
We're good. No, well, now we know it. This little group knows it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I love that. I think that's great. I will mention one of the Houma craftsmen I worked with over the years. Whenever he would describe why he lived in Dulac, he would often say, "It's like a little fishing village out of a book." and I thought that was amazing. And here's this community where they have the old French loup-garou werewolf tales and all these, the sort of boogeyman in the woods, the homme de grand bois, the big man of the backwoods, and that he would actually pull something like, sounds like the little heraldic village. So people have these different ways of talking about these things. Well, how about the other side of this? Did you ever hear people who are into heavy mythic literary realms say something to you about the constructs that you were dealing with here? They probably all generally thought this was really great.
yeah, pretty much. I know somebody in the crowd just mentioned The Wizard of Oz, which I had never heard before. There's a shot where they're coming home, walking across the marshland, across from where the road ends in Ile de Jean Charles, when they're walking back through all the dead trees in the marsh. And he was like, oh, it's like the Yellow Brick Road. So, and I had never thought of that before, but
Could be deep in your consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely watched it a million
almost
times,
a DNA even.
So,
what about the locals, leaders from some of the Indian groups and Cajun Cajuns and and oral tradition Cajun leaders and all? What about some of the different? I mean, it's not like they operate as a homogeneous mindset.
Yeah.
There's lots of different people in Terrebonne and those parishes with their worldviews. What's their reaction been to that?
I don't know. I haven't. I showed it so many times and got so many reactions. I'm not sure I specifically could point it out.
We need to go to the drive-in that Louis' family was operating and do it.
We had an amazing screen down there, though. That was one of the coolest things we ever did. Is we set up a screen in the Montague gym or the rec center down there and showed it like in a room full of dogs and crying babies, and it was the wildest.
That's like what's in the film.
Yeah, it was like the film. It ruled, and the reaction from the actual talent and so many people were involved, and that was all amazing. And I don't know, we've had various different, I've had all kinds of arguments with all kinds of people about different parts of the film over the years, but I can't pick them all out. Maybe we can argue with some people here.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't be asked to recall all the arguments about the film. This is a night to both celebrate what you've done as well or offer a little critique. Louis, why do you think it left you, aside from the cochon meal, why do you think it hit you so hard? I mean, obviously the music was in it, but it's more than that. I mean, there's a whole way of life and an environment that you're familiar with.
Yeah, I think it really accurately portrayed, just like he's saying when they showed it in the Montague gym or whatever, full of dogs and crying babies. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you really can't, unless you've been there or you're from there, or whatever. You really can't imagine, what basic daily life is like in these areas. And to me, it really portrays the feeling of being down there. There's like a certain amount of simplicity, a certain amount of urgency, of enjoyment, and also danger or whatever. But it's, to me, that's what the thing is that you really feel, and it's a heightened awareness, self-awareness possibly, right, where it's like, wow, they really tapped in to the feeling you get when like, I've gone down to Ile Jean Charles and Pointe aux Chenes and all that, but it also reminds me of the road I live on as well, and it's the same characters. And it's funny because speaking of judgment and arguments and stuff, I've had some of the, what do you call them, academic Cajuns?
Educations.
Educations. I've had some of the Educations.
Some of my best friends are Educations. I don't mean it.
some of the Lafayette purists and such, even from the areas where they filmed, have come up to me and said, like, oh, I saw the movie, and then put their head on their hands and sat down and had to tell me how much they didn't like it because it portrayed them as beasts and all this stuff. I was like, wait, it's fiction. This is not a documentary. And you know, some people got offended because, like, oh, I'm from there, and that's not how we are at all. It's like, well, you know, you're not, you know, if you're taking this as a nonfiction documentary, I could see how you'd be offended, but it's nothing like that. It's a story, it's fiction, and I've had many more people tell me the opposite, that they loved it and that it really, you know, rung home and that it really spoke to them as it did to me. But, you know, a few people would tell me how they're offended and such. But, you know, it's not about cultural purity. It's not about, you know, this ideal of what we are and what we're trying to be or even to go beyond that, a romantic view of what it is to be a Cajun or someone from South Louisiana. Because there's a lot of things to me that are way overly romantic, and they actually leave out the real story. And usually the real story is much more interesting than the romantic version. And to me, Beasts of Southern Wild taps into the real story, and it goes much deeper than that and goes into questions that, you know, we may or may not ask ourselves, but should, you know, about a lot of things. I mean, about the environmental thing, but as far as the relationship with the dad and the mom being, you know, gone, but then the earth and all that, it's amazing. And so to me, you know, it really just is. It's the first film that I've seen that really accurately portrays Louisiana. That's not a documentary.
Okay. So we got
my Louisiana.
all right. Well, so we got the native and the local, and we got you, and we have a microphone, and I think it's that time where we'd love to hear from you, ask questions of these guys, and I think Andy's going to help us out here. If anybody would like to ask a question, you will be in the house sound, I think. Okay.
Did you come across any resistance when you first were researching these towns and going in and talking to people?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, I do not fit in down there. But I was like the dude on the shrimp dock with the laptop, and I took a lot of shit for that. But that was like, I knew that's, you know, I really love working this way. I love sort of trying to make films in communities that have never had a film made in them before and that aren't, you know, filled with tourists and outsiders, and trying to figure out a way to going into the community and trying to build trust and collaborate with people there. And it just took a long time. And what I did was I just rented, there's a little marina down at the very end of Pointe-aux-Chenes, and I just rented like a fishing room, like a room that you'd rent if you're going fishing. And I just stayed there by myself without a camera and just sat on that dock. Right, actually, you saw it in the scene when he empties the shrimp net out into the picking pan. I forget the name of it now, but I just sat there every night. There was always a bunch of guys there. I would sit around. They'd make fun of me, and then a couple months went by, and then somebody was like, you know, put down the computer. I'm going to show you something. Like, get in this boat. Where are we going? Not telling. Put down the computer. You know.
You knew they liked you then, man.
Yeah, and so it just took a long time, and just, you know, being committed to it and not showing up with like 20 people and a bunch of cameras and being like, and I think also, I mean, it's a really cool thing too. It's a really cool thing about making movies and not like making fictional films, is that it's something that everybody loves, you know. And I think that it would have been much, much harder to go down there and make a good documentary, and people would have been much more worried about being like, I'm documenting you and your life and putting that on screen, and that helped us. And people just like movies, and, you know, if we'd gone down there being like, we want to do an interpretive dance about your town, I don't think anybody would have been down, you know. Good
point.
Not an insult to interpretive dance, but just movies are universal. You know, everybody loves them, and it was an adventure story. It's a myth, and it was fun, and we. And in the end, we worked. You know, the team was a real mix of people who adopted us, and we would have gotten ourselves killed without you know, real Cajuns showing us how to navigate those environments. So that was ended up being totally collaborative. The cast was local, and we knew that was essential, trying to kind of express the place that had to be done by people that were from there. And you know, another thing I've been wanting to say about the music is, on my short film that we made in New Orleans, it was much more about New Orleans, and we had a brass band parade in the movie. But we
You mean Glory at Sea?
Glory at Sea, yeah. And we got terrible sound on the day of the parade. It was the Hot 8, and so we went back and we were cutting the film in New York, and we tried to re-record the song in New York, and it was a complete disaster. We ended up having to cut it from the film because we could not actually replicate the music, no matter who we tried to find. And so when we got to this point and we needed a piece of actual local music for the film, you know, we had no money, but I was like, we absolutely have to go to Lafayette. We have to go record this with real musicians who can do this, because no one can do this anywhere else in the world. It's not you have to grow up doing it. And so that mentality was in the music, and it was in the casting, and it was in everything we tried to do to try to bring out the place through the people that were involved in the film.
Seems like when you went to the aesthetics, you were able to really make that direct connection, as opposed to if you're trying to do a documentary, it's sort of, like you say, we'll film and you'll be the subject kind of thing.
Right.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to follow up on her comment and something Nick mentioned, and you speak about myth and place and the importance of both of those, and speaking more about the place and Pontchartrain and Ile Jean-Charles, it's like Native Americans have been written out of the story, and the film is very much black and white when it comes to race, and yet these communities, it's significant. They've lived down there, as Nick started when he first with this. They've been there for hundreds of years, you know, and yet if somebody were watching this and you want them, in one hand, to get kind of a sense of Louisiana, a feel for it, without it being a documentary, they would have no idea that these communities existed. And I was just wondering if you could speak more about that and elaborate, like the fact that on film that they're not there, their presence is notably absent.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of happened organically. I mean, we, obviously when you're down there working, it's such a huge issue, and it's everybody you're working with is connected to, the HOMA or the BCC and all those conflicts that were going on. We were deeply involved in navigating and really considered. That was when I went and asked Nick for his research on the tribes down there, was when we were really considering going sort of down that path and into that dialogue. And the original top candidate for the girl was a young HOMA girl that was from the island. And had she gotten the part, certainly that would have ended up becoming a big presence in the film. But just based on who we cast, who was a little girl from HOMA, Quevenjene, I think that the whole thing of the bathtub, which was absolutely not accurate to anywhere in Louisiana, was that it was a place in which race didn't really exist, and the whole idea of the bathtub was really that it was this place where all the things that divide people in every society, whether it's money, whether it's age, whether it's race, whether it's religion, we were going to remove all those divides and create this incredibly unified place. And so the idea of sort of like identifying a race and getting into the specific politics of an individual race wasn't something that we wanted to do. I think that, in the scenes of the bathtub, there's a bunch of HOMA, ethnically HOMA Indians on screen, but it just so happened that the main family in the film is black, and I don't know. I think that it wasn't an intentionality to leave out that story, but it was an intentionality to not get into sort of like specifically racial issues, because we wanted to create like a mythological place where there weren't racial issues and create this idealized version, which is not accurate. Yeah, that's a fantasy for sure. It's still a fantasy. So.
First, Louis, I just wanted to let you know that I and many other people had that same reaction to the film that y'all did. I had to lie down for a while afterwards. So
I'm sorry about the
camera.
camera work. It's also the camera work's real shaky. I can't
Yeah, no
claim
steady
that it's
cams.
all the beauty and the emotion. It actually just makes people sick because they feel like they're on an
Cots in the
airplane.
theater.
We didn't have the money for a steady cam. I apologize. Yeah.
And I'm sure that it was also the very powerful music. So thank you very much for that as
All
well.
right. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you'd speak a little bit about your choice to use aurochs, kind of how you became aware of that symbol and why you chose that, and kind of what you were thinking when you decided to do that.
Good, a mythic question.
Yeah, it was something from the original play, and how do I make this? But Lucy's like one of our exercises in writing the film would be Ben teaches Lucy science, and Lucy like is the most unscientific person you'd ever met. So I would sort of tell her history, and then she would sort of regurgitate it back, and eventually we would end up at Hush Puppy's version of science. But the idea of the aurochs was that, you know, it's this little girl in school who sort of heard these little things, and what we were trying to get at, I mean, it's a number of things, but she's this little girl who sort of is connecting her experience like back to the beginning of time. And she knows that there's this one type of people that she thinks of as the cavemen that were there and then were gone, and then is constantly thinking about how are those people that are now extinct remembered, and seeing herself as the last of her kind, and how are people going to remember the people of the bathtub when it's been wiped off the face of the earth. And so I think in her personal, this idea of like of an extinct animal, you know, and not sort of using a dinosaur, you know, using like an extinct animal that we could make, because the aurochs are the real life aurochs, what we shot are little baby piglets that are actually dressed in nutria fur
Wow.
costumes.
Talk about dealing with ethnicity.
Yeah, so we wanted to like, so we wanted to build out the mythic animal from her world, you know, like because she has a pig and nutria are so much part, you know. So we wanted to like build out like what things would she be latching onto to sort of construct her demon, and then also this idea that they connect back to an extinct Ice Age creature that was around when the previous people that were wiped off the face of the earth were there. And so those are some of the reasons why we landed on that particular creature.
Someone else has got the mic up there. Yeah.
I believe I heard you say you used to do animation. So I just started an animation business, so I wanted to know more about what you used to do and why you transitioned into live action.
Intense loneliness. Yeah, intense loneliness. But yeah, it was funny. I got into animation because I didn't have any money to make movies, and it was a really good way to make a movie by yourself, and puppets. And then I spent years and years by myself in dark rooms, and was becoming really weird. And so and then I came to New Orleans and was like, oh, I want to make something about people. You know, when I was in New York, I just wanted to hide in a dark room and play with puppets. And then when I came here, I was like, oh, I want to learn about people. I want to connect to people, and I want to make stories about people. And I still love animation, but this was almost a hybrid. You know, it was like I still got to deal with some of the things you get to deal with in animation, and creatures, and you know, all that stuff that sort of fills my imagination and that I always want to realize. And you know, so now I'm trying to figure out how to bring those elements into films that are about people. But you know, I feel you. I've been playing with those puppets, and it's a dark road.
Yeah.
That's fun.
While if the mic can keep circulating, I'm going to turn to Louis on something for a second. I mean, it seems to me that the position of Cajuns and other people who carry deep tradition in Louisiana increasingly is a question of how can you be progressive about inclusivity of tradition into the future, and see tradition as part of modernity, but not isolated from it and left behind. And you've done some things with antique heirloom plants and seeds, built your own house. Could you say a little bit about the old skills and the knowledge you've actually had to research to create an environment around yourself that you know, is satisfactory to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, I guess the sorry, I have to think about it for a sec. But basically, moving sustainably into the future to me requires knowledge from the past, because the modern age is all disposable and it's immediate, and the way that people lived for thousands of years before the last couple hundred years was was naturally sustainable, because they were dealing with much more natural elements, natural resources that they had to keep going to keep alive, which is why huge civilizations went extinct in the first place a lot of times. But when I got to a certain age and met some elder people who kept this knowledge alive, that kind of same as Ben scoffing at his parents for folklore, and same thing when I heard Cajun music when I was a little kid. We used to make fun of it, and my dad would play it like, oh yeah, and when I got to the age to appreciate these things, and then I started meeting old people and or taking interest in old people. I met some old people, and their and this knowledge of and this practice of keeping gardens and collecting the seeds, and in music and songs, and how long the songs have been in their families and around and such, and so I just made an effort to try to hold on to as much as I could personally, and then eventually started a nonprofit called Cultural Research Institute of Acadiana, that we have a seed bank, and we actually went down to Pointe-aux-Chenes, Houma, and Lafayette, and Ville Platte, and all over the place, and but one of our biggest seed donors was in Pointe-aux-Chenes. She was a Dardar. She is a Dardar. Indian name. Yes, and she has this huge garden behind her house where she keeps all kind of seeds going. And it's like, where'd you get this? Well, I got this from Mr. Valentin over in Lafourche Parish. And where'd you get this? Well, I got that from my défunt uncle, my late uncle. And so passing the knowledge, and a lot of it that happens through music. But when you get into, what is the most important things, music is one of them, but food, of course, would be important. And seed stock, genetics, and such like that. But I think that's, and to me, the way that relates to the movie is, it's part of your perspective of life and what's important. So what is important? Is it important to modernize, or is it important to live the way you live and keeps you happy? The way they break out the hospital and all that, it really rings home. But there's there's a lot of connection that I think possibly why we ended up playing in New Orleans, and why I ended up meeting Ben, is because we take something that's very, very old and seemingly rustic and outdated, and bring it to a modern age, and to where it fits in the modern society. And I've gotten a lot of the same criticism that I've heard about the movie for our music. Saying, oh, well, you can't do that. That's not tradition. Like, what do you mean it's not tradition? Like, we're playing songs that are older than the songs you're talking about, and the songs you're talking about were just country songs translated into French. So I'm not trying to bust your bubble, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
But you do occasionally bust some of their bubbles, but not mine. When you play talking about my generation with a French chorus, as I recall. So
Yeah,
you kind of merge the best of all these worlds.
No, exactly, and that's the thing and to use the best of both worlds is key to me. And I mean, same with my house, a lot of old reclaimed cypress, but of course, a lot of modern technology, and what you're gonna do. I mean, you can't go back in the past. You have to keep moving forward. So, how do you best do that? And that's what speaks to me most about the movie is just this intense urgency about it, and that's
Okay. Matt?
You know.
I'd throw out a question that kind of fits music and the film history of Louisiana that goes back to the Louisiana story. I'm wondering first whether, Ben, if you had any influences early on in seeing the films of Les Blanc, or even Belisaire the Cajun, things that were not done by in a documentary style. And even the old music of the Louisiana story had the Cajun music all the way back to 1936 or whatever it was. But I'm just wondering how.
And they had the orchestra playing it. Who was the famous composer that did the work actually too?
Virgil Thompson.
That's right, Virgil Thompson. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Les Blanc is probably the biggest influence of more than any fiction filmmaker on the film, both as just a way of getting to see culture in Louisiana in a time when I wasn't here, and that, but even just cinematically, like we modeled really the camera work on his camera work. The color palette was based on his color palette. We shot on the same type of film. Like in that scene that we watched, that truck with Cajun musicians in it with the loudspeakers at the top is directly stolen from, I think it's in Drywood, the Clifton Chenier film, and they got them. It opens on a Mardi Gras scene, and they're in like they're in a Budweiser truck, and the musicians are inside, and they have the handhelds inside, and they're just megaphones, you know, and just the way that he approached the culture, I find like incredibly beautiful, you know, and it's so open and it's so warm, and it has such a love for people, you know. The way that he did his documentary was never like I'm gonna study you, I'm gonna like dissect you and then display your body parts for somebody else. You just felt like he was at the party and he was seeing it through his own eyes, which were outsiders' eyes, but he was accepted and loved, and you can even see that just in where he puts the camera. You know, it's like when you watch the scenes of Always for Pleasure, he's just in it. You know, he's like right in the middle, and sometimes you even see him there, and there's clearly like a beer can in his hand. He's just inside the party, and he was translating that experience of really doing it, and so trying to figure out a way. I mean, obviously, making a fiction film is nothing like that because you're staging everything, but trying to make it feel like the camera was inside of the action as opposed to studying the action and putting it in the point. Yeah. And we studied the blocking of how those scenes went down and dissected them and then translated them to fiction in tons of ways. And I just think he's, you know, as good as it ever will get.
Yeah, and the last time I was in this room, I don't know if any of you guys were here, but we had Les here. He's since passed away.
Yeah.
And he talked about just some of these same issues right in this room.
He literally swam off of a riverboat during a homecoming dance and swam ashore because he was bored.
He did tell the Tulane crowd that this was his happiest time. And
That's an intelligent thing to do when you consider the currents of the river. But, you know.
Well, folks, the clock on the clubhouse wall is just about at 7. And I want to thank Kathy Jack from Anthropology and Environmental Studies and Andy Horowitz as conveners. And do either of you have any comments or questions? You've been sitting here so carefully and thoughtfully just so allowed to bring us together. And if anyone deserves a last word, I think you guys had any thoughts or interests in this. Well, both of you represent the worlds where culture and environment kind of are near each other in history and in the way that human beings comport themselves. So if you don't want to say anything, we're glad you're here.
I would like to say thank you so much for agreeing, all three of you, to do this, to Andy for putting it together, and this amazing crowd. I see so many familiar faces and a lot of people I don't know, which is also amazing. So it's what I think is really important is we have such diversity of people in this audience, and even the three of you all have that common thread, but you still very diverse people, backgrounds, but we're all here together on a common thread, which is the environment. So thank you all for participating.
And come to the Sanger Saturday night.
That's right. Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't yet bought your tickets, get them before they sell out. Be there on Saturday at the Sanger. It's going to be amazing. Also, if you look at just any one painting in the gallery next door, you then are entitled to the glass of wine at the reception. So let's all go join their party in the spirit of community and thank these people for coming.
Thank you. Very good. Great, man. Very good. Excellent, as usual. Give it a left-handed shake.